Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a panel highlighting faith or religious bodies and domestic violence. My name is Nicole Powell. I serve as the Community Education Manager for the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County, located in Media. And we have joined with us two panelists that will help us dive more into how we can work together to support victims and survivors of domestic violence, not only in Delaware County, but also elsewhere. So without further ado, I will allow them to introduce themselves and share with us their title and religious affiliation.
Hi, I guess I'll go first. I am Minister Tia May. I am a member of Dare to Imagine Church in Mount Airy, Philadelphia. I'm under Pastor Kevin Johnson. I'm also the author of Suffering in Silence, which is my story of surviving, my personal story of surviving domestic violence, which is available on Amazon. Thank you so much, Nicole.
And good morning. I'm happy to be here. My name is Reverend Dr. Larry Pickens, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches, which is headquartered in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm also a member of both the United Methodist Church. I serve as a pastor in that church and also have dual standing in the United Church of Christ.
Perfect. So thank you all once again for joining us amid your busy schedules, I'm sure. So without further ado, we will kind of go into asking some questions, and we hope that everyone would also add to the conversation by asking additional questions or giving additional input. There were attempts to include more religious affiliations, so please share any perspectives you may have as it relates to experiencing domestic violence or experience within a religious body in this connection. So, for the two of you, are there any connection or experiences that you may have with domestic violence, whether it be personally or professionally, if you do not mind sharing?
Well, yes, I think about my own upbringing, and I was kind of reminded of this recently. My nephew was sharing a story with me about um, something that happened between my father and my oldest brother when I was younger, and it involved actually my older brother attempting to throw. Well, he actually threw a punch at my father, and he my father pulled out a gun, and my nephew was telling me about the story, and I said, I don't remember that, and I thought about the fact that a lot of times when you encounter trauma, you just shut down. There are some people who just shut down, and it's a coping mechanism. It's survival, and I think that my experience with trauma in a lot of instances involved that instinct. So have discovered is that later in life, I'm becoming more aware of the impact that this trauma has had on my psyche, my body, all of who I am. So that's just one example that I was sharing today.
Thank you.
So for me personally, I am a survivor of domestic violence. I've been married for almost 20 years before I'd left my ex-husband, who's also a reverend. So that's my personal experience, physical, mental, emotional, financial, spiritual abuse, the whole nine. Professionally, through ministry, my experience is in counseling victims and survivors of domestic violence. I lead a support group in my church home. So professionally, I deal with those who are either in the experience right now or have been through it. So, those are my connections.
Thank you. And again, for more information on Minister Tia May, please, I encourage you to check out her book on Amazon entitled "Suffering in Silence." It is a very beautifully written experience on how we can continue this conversation. So, thank you for sharing also the concept of spiritual abuse. And so, oftentimes, when we have conversations and speak to survivors and victims of domestic violence, we present what we call an image entitled a power and control wheel. And on that power and control wheel, there identifies a variety of ways in which an abuser exerts power and control, or we see abusive behaviors. However, one of the things that is not explicitly stated on that power and control wheel is spiritual abuse. So, how would you define spiritual abuse? And we can start back with Tia.
So the way that I define it and the way that I experienced it, I experienced spiritual abuse at the hands of my ex-husband by him ridiculing, my efforts to study, to pray, and to preach. I mean, he purposely made those moments horrible for me to the point to where I stopped studying, I stopped praying, I stopped preaching, I stopped doing everything because it seemed to subside his attitude for the moment. It seemed that he would be better when I pulled away. So I walked away from my spiritual nourishment. I walked away from my spiritual activities and duties. I mean, he literally made fun of me. He laughed at me. He would stare at me with just these horrible glares while I was actually preaching. And I mentioned this in my book. I would say, does anybody else see him? Does anybody else see his face? Does anybody else see his posture? It was like he was just glaring at me with hate. And so that's one way that I experienced it. But another way for me, at the hands of other clergy, I experienced spiritual abuse by them trying to convince me that God wanted me to stay married to a man who was physically and emotionally, spiritually abusive. He was mentally abusive. He was sexually abusive, everything. They literally tried to convince me that God would not allow me to leave this marriage. And abusive behavior is excused and ignored by church leadership, unfortunately. Abusers are still allowed to preach and teach and lead ministries. They're allowed to continue to serve as bishops and pastors, elders, deacons, trustees, whatever it is, the whole nine. It just goes on, and not to mention the sexist sermons that are directed towards women. The power that men have in church and leadership, it seems as if it makes them untouchable. And to me, all those examples, that's what spiritual abuse is.
Thank you.
I think spiritual abuse has its roots for a lot of us in the church. I think oftentimes we hear messages that are abusive, that divide people. I was thinking about this today, and recently had a conversation with a pastor who was raising an issue about some of our gospel music, which talks about issues around liberation, and then describes liberation in terms of being free from homosexuality, being free from one's sexual orientation. And that's really kind of, to me, that's spiritual abuse when we use our scripture or spirituality to kind of define someone as essentially being defective. I once remember I was sharing this story this morning as I was thinking about this subject, and I remember once a parishioner coming to me as a pastor and sharing that her husband had told her that if she went back to school, she had a desire to go back to school and get a doctorate degree, that if she went back to school, he would leave her. And her question was, what should I do, Pastor? And I said to her, your husband's going to leave you anyway. So I said, you need to do what you have to do in order to develop yourself and become, strong and autonomous. So I said, this is just, if you succumb to this now, then there's going to be some other red line that he will set that you will confront. So I told her you should go to school, and to me, I think that what Minister Tia was saying is so important, that you will have spiritual figures telling you somehow that you should succumb to this. You should go along with this kind of thinking, and I think that what's problematic in church setting oftentimes and with spiritual leaders is that we sometimes gaslight people. And I think that's a real dynamic that exists in faith communities that we have to address.
Very well said. Thank you for saying that. And again, a part of our role as a community education outreach team is to educate individuals, also faith-based communities, but anyone who would allow us to have the conversation in terms of how to understand what domestic violence looks like and the services that our agency offers as well to support those experiences. And so, as you mentioned, in terms of how individuals may or may not understand domestic violence specifically. So from a faith-based perspective and from the faith-based community, how do we typically see or identify domestic violence? Because fortunately, it sounds like the two of you are well-rounded in understanding of what this may look like, because I don't think a lot of people would identify the experience that you expressed about the young lady wanting to go back to school and her husband not encouraging that and saying, if you do, I will leave. I don't think a lot of people would identify that as domestic violence, but we do. So how would you understand the faith-based community to view domestic violence?
I think that we need to be sensitive to what's happening with our people. It's hard for me to talk about liberating people or making people whole persons if I'm not in tune with what's going on in their lives, and I think that's a role that spiritual leaders have to play. We in what I do at the Council of Churches, for example, we have a ministry that is providing chaplains on I-80, the Interstate 80. And one of the things that I've become aware of is that unless we make chaplains sensitive to human trafficking, we're not really serving communities well, or those who are traveling in our vicinity. And I think that principle applies for the church and its leadership. We have to make people aware about how to detect domestic violence. What's happening to parishioners. Get engaged with folks, and I think that's a critical element for us. I don't remember a class in seminary on domestic violence. So I think that it means that we need to really make this a part of curriculums in seminary settings, and make pastors aware of how they can be proactive in addressing these kinds of issues.
Thank you.
So from my faith perspective, speaking individually, domestic violence is not something that anyone should tolerate. Every person has the right to be free of abuse. Every person has the right to take the necessary steps to put themselves and their children in a safe and abuse-free environment. Unfortunately, there are other clergy members who share my faith. And for that matter, clergy members in different faiths, different religions, that encourage victims of domestic violence to stay with their partners. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that notion. It's irresponsible of any clergy member to force or persuade or try to convince a victim of domestic violence to stay with a partner that is abusing them and putting their lives in danger. And we need clergy to understand to what domestic violence looks like, because each situation is different. My ex-husband took pride in the fact that he never left a bruise on my body. He was physically abusive, but no one could look at me and see that because I never had a bruise on me. For some individuals, it's emotional abuse. It's the words, and it's how you damage me emotionally. You can't see that. You can't look at me and see that I'm damaged emotionally. It's financial abuse. So there's just a lot of aspects of it that you can't see, but clergy needs to be trained on what domestic violence is. There are some victims who are bruised, but they cover them. You know how to cover them with makeup and wearing long sleeve shirts and just coming up with the excuses. You know, I fell down the steps, I bumped into this, or I bumped into that. We need to recognize what abuse is, because it may not be what you think of. I know some people feel like if you don't have a broken bone, then that's not abuse. And that is not what it is. And sometimes the easiest bruise to heal is one that's physical. But when you go deeper into the mental and emotional, that's just as much domestic violence as, you know, someone putting their hands on you. So we need to recognize that each person's story is different. Abuse comes out in a different way. It could be someone who doesn't allow their partner to speak in public. Why is he or she never saying a word when they're in front of individuals? Why did their attitude and their behavior, their demeanor, why did they just shut down when their partner came, you know, into the picture? So we need to recognize that domestic violence is different for every person. And then, like me, you may have the person who experiences all of it, but again, no one could look at me and tell. Unless I opened my mouth and said something, you wouldn't know. So we need clergy to be sensitive. We need them to listen. We need them to learn. And you can't go by what you think and what you feel, because domestic violence, if I put it in front of your face, it may be something that you've never seen or never even heard of.
Thank you. Very well said. And I hear what you said in terms of what has been, one, your experience, and two, the understanding in terms of how clergy or leaders have responded in your faith as it relates to your experience and the experience of others who may be in a domestic violence household, whether they be a partner or even a family member as well. And so Dr. Pickens, if you don't mind adding to what other responses have there been from the church as it relates to domestic violence, and or what should the response be?
I think the response should be really comprehensive in that, first of all, we need to teach people how to relate to others, how to love people, and basically how to respect people in the context of relationships. So I think that even in the framework of what we do to train families, it's important for us to think about the ways in which we inform the dignity of each person. You know, if we really believe that people are fearfully and wonderfully made, then that suggests that there's this divinity within each one of us that needs to be affirmed. And I think that theologically, that's the role that the church ought to play. You know, I find Tia's statement important, because when she talks about people trying to encourage people who are in abusive situations to stay in them, there's this sense that somehow that the sacredness of marriage somehow covers that. And I think that the sacredness of our human existence is something that God affirms, and that violence towards us is not something that is of God. So I think that one role the church has to play and can play is helping people understand that somehow they're not placed in a certain role and purpose. I think that there are some people who believe that somehow their responsibility or their role is to be in a marriage, obey another person, and be accepting of whatever that person wants him or her to do. I don't think that. We all have our own agency. We have the ability to make decisions about ourselves, and when we make decisions that I think affirm ourselves, whenever we find ourselves in an environment that does not, we need to extricate ourselves from those environments. And I think the church ought to play a role in doing that. It ought to train men about how to treat women, how to relate to women, understand that women are equals, and that they are to be supported in what they want to do in their own work and experiences. It means that men take a greater role in family life. It means being aware of what training needs to take place for young girls and women around affirming who they are and the ability that God has placed in their spirits. And I think that that's the role of the church, is to create that kind of a setting where people are really set up to be the people that God has called them to be.
And in order to do that, please let us know. We are happy to provide that conversation to you all for any ministry group, for young people, for adults, for women, for men. We love to have that conversation and discussion and facilitate that progress in how we can support individuals who are experiencing domestic violence. Tia, would you also like to add to that answer?
Yes. So in my case, I can speak personally. The current response of the church was unbelief and abandonment. And I mean, I went to several different churches, several different pastors to get help. And the attitude was just uncaring. Go pray and it'll get better. Read these scriptures and you'll be okay. Stay by his side and support him. And the premise was keep tithing, keep giving your offerings, keep serving in ministry, and everything will be fine. And so you have the two of us standing in front of your church every Sunday, teaching a class, preaching, or whatever. But I'm telling you, when I get home, this is what I'm going to have to deal with. Not only when I get home, on my way to church, when I get back in a car and on my way back home, this is what I'm dealing with. But you still want to put a microphone in my hand and you want me to preach to these people. So I had to ignore my brokenness and I had to ignore my pain. And it took so much for me to get to the point to where I finally opened my mouth. I finally said, I need help. I can't do this anymore. And that was the response that I got. Had it not been for Pastor May and Pastor Eugene Davis, they're the pastors of Greater Work Ministries in West Philadelphia, I don't know where my life would have gone, because they were the only pastors who stood up and said, this is not right. This is not of God. And they stood, Pastor Eugene stood toe to toe with my ex-husband and said, this is not of God. This is what you need to do and need not to do. Had it not been for them, I don't know where I would be, because I felt like I was just losing my mind at that point. So that was the only positive result that I reached. And I had been through, I don't know how many pastors and churches by the time I reached out to Pastor May and Pastor Eugene. Now, what the response should be from the church, I want to share from, there's a website called Life Saving Divorce. And I just think there was an interview done and it was just stated beautifully what church leaders should do. And I just want to share that. So one of the first things is that the church leaders should focus on immediate physical safety. You know, they should make sure that the victim is safe. You know, take care of that first. Validate the victims. Listen to what they're saying. You know, don't just throw scriptures at them. Don't just say, well, let's pray and it'll get better. Help the victims to find a support group. And one other thing that they mentioned was to help the victim share and tell their story in writing, in person, or by video. And that was something that really stood out to me, because I got to a point to where I had specific conversations with my mother and with my best friend. And I told them, this is what he is doing. And if anything happens to me, he did it. I left instructions. I said, this is what I want to be done with my children, my insurance policies, money, everything. It was important for me to be clear and to let them understand and know this is what's happening to me and this is what he's doing, because the church wasn't listening to me. And so I didn't want there to be any great mystery or anything. So if something happens, he did it. So there were instances where, I did write some things down, and there were people that I could trust, that I talked to. And that's really important, because there's so many cases where a victim is not believed. That victim loses their life, or they're in a situation where they may be incapacitated, they can't speak for themselves. But if you allow them to share their story, their words will be able to speak for them when they physically can't do it. So that is something, it's different, but it really is important, and it does mean a lot.
Very well said. And do you mind also repeating the resource in which you found those helpful tools to support survivors?
Yes, the website is called Life Saving Divorce. They cover several topics, but domestic violence is something that they do speak to. It's Life Saving Divorce.
Thank you. So after sharing much of that, it sounds like what we all have to understand is that that religious bodies serve as a support system for families of any situation, whether it be domestic violence or grief, so on and so forth, right? And it sounds like the support system is kind of faulty, but that's what we're here for, to kind of, pave those holes in the, in the road, to kind of support each other and build that foundation to do better, right? And build progress. And so what we would want to also kind of have a conversation around, because again, we understand domestic violence to be so much more than just physical. And we oftentimes share in conversations, when we have a presentation, when we have the opportunity to speak before people, we always conclude the conversation with a safety plan. How do you support individuals who are going through this experience? How do you safety plan with them? And we oftentimes say too that there is not really a blueprint, a checklist to what a safety plan could look like, because it has to be tailored to that individual's experience. And I will honestly say, Tia, in reading your book, Suffering in Silence, the thing that really stuck with me is that you had said that you have found peace in losing your life at the hands of your husband, of your ex-husband. And that was scary for me. But the moment you said I was at peace about it, and I think that's ultimately what people want out of life, is just peace, right? And of course, safety. But the fact that you said you would have been at peace, you were already at peace that this was going to happen. How can we support and safety plan with individuals so they don't have to be at peace with losing their life at the hands of a partner or family member? Tia, would you like to start?
Yes. So, so the section in the book that you're speaking of, I had been up for days on end. I didn't have any sleep because I was afraid to sleep at night, because I didn't know what, my ex-husband was going to do to me in my sleep. There were times that I woke up and he would be standing over me. And I didn't hear that. I didn't hear it in the night. He would play with knives, and I thought that would be how he took my life, because he played with knives all the time. And I remember this night I was in my bed, I was laying down. The blinds were black, and the moonlight was shining through. It was a blue light, and I remember it thinking, God, it's okay. If he kills me tonight, at any time, it's okay, because I know I'm going to go to be with you. And I know that you're going to take care of my children. I'd been trying to get help. And it just seemed like I wasn't getting any answers. I felt stuck. But in that moment, I did have peace with, if he takes my life, if this is how I go, I had peace with that. But To me, a safety plan looks like whatever I need to do to keep myself and my children safe. A safety plan looks like whatever you need to do. Everybody's situation is different. It's saving money, it's moving to a different location, it's doing whatever I need to do to get away from my abuser. And everybody's situation is different. Everybody doesn't have the time and the resources to plan. Sometimes you have to make a split decision. You have to just get up and go, but you know where you are. It's caring for myself mentally, physically, and emotionally. Is reaching out to domestic violence counselors, to my support group, to the hotlines. Whatever it is that I need to do, that is my safety plan. And a safety plan looks like divorce if that's what I need to do. It's if that's what you need to do, then divorce. If it's part of your safety plan, then you need to go ahead and do it. And I truly believe that women in the church are waiting and searching for a voice of authority to tell them and to confirm that leaving or separating or divorcing from an abusive partner is okay. And women are looking for permission to take steps to save themselves. And it's sad. It's sad that we are in that state where we're debating on the value of women's lives in the eyes of God. It's just, that is just absolutely ridiculous. There's a quote from Justin and Lindsay A. Holcomb, and it says, when a man chooses to be abusive, he breaks his covenant. An abusive man forfeits the right to be married. When abuse is involved, that ceases to be a marriage. So women are literally waiting for someone to say, you can go, you can leave, you can take care of yourself, do what you need to survive, because there's so many other voices in authority telling them stay. You can take it, you can deal with it. And that's just, it's just not okay. So in short, a safety plan looks like whatever it needs to look like for you. Do it in what the short amount of time that you have. If you're able to plan out longer, then you do that. Me personally, myself, I gave myself, when I knew that I had to leave, I gave myself 6 months. I planned to save money and to go. But as I mentioned in my book, things deteriorated so quickly that 6 months went out the window. My plan turned into weeks that I had to go. So you do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And God loves you. God cares for you. God is there for you. And I will be that voice of authority to say, leave. If you need to leave, leave. To save yourself and to save your children, leave if that's what you need to do.
Thank you, Dr. Pickens.
I think Tia has, hit every thing that needs to be said. I think one of the things she said is love is important for us to. It's important for us to know that God loves us, and I just don't believe that a loving God will want any of us to remain in abusive situations. That's just not who God is. So I think that when we talk about love, it's important to think about God's willingness and desire to see us fully develop to become people who make significant impact upon our world. I think that relationships are important, but when a relationship becomes abusive, it's not a relationship anymore, and it becomes really a debilitating dynamic in our lives. So I think whenever we find ourselves in an abusive situation, we have to develop that safety plan and think about what are the steps that we need to take in order to get to a point of safety. I believe in reconciliation, but there are some things that we cannot reconcile ourselves to, and I think abuse is one of them. I oftentimes liken domestic abuse to terrorism. And what is terrorism designed to do? It's designed to place us in a state of constant anxiety and fear. And we know what that does to our bodies, what that does to our spirits when we're in this state of constant fear and anxiety. And I think that part of getting out of that frozenness is understanding that we need to think about where are the safe spaces for us to go? Who are the people who we can turn to in order to move us to a sense of wholeness, who can help us get to the places where we need to be? How do we set aside money in an account that only we know about so that we can begin our process of liberating ourselves? I just think that these are steps that we have to help people make. And I believe that faith leaders have to play a role in helping people shape what that looks like in order to free them. So those are some of the thoughts that I have about how we move forward as people of faith, and what church leaders can do to enable that process.
Perfect. Thank you. And as Tia already emphasized, it is okay to reach out for help. It is okay to leave. And in order to do so safely, please feel free to reach out to the Domestic Abuse Project 24/7 hotline at 610-565-4590. Another amazing resource that I would strongly encourage individuals to utilize to want to implement a safety plan or think about a safety plan for themselves. The Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, their website, which is pcadv.org, they have an amazing tool that you can utilize to support safety planning. And we also love loveisrespect.org for adolescents or young people, or really anyone, to get a better understanding of what that relationship might look like. If you feel it's unhealthy, go to loveisrespect.org, take a quiz, and see if it is indeed unhealthy. We also like to encourage, specifically as our previous panel of male advocates, we love for men to also speak up and speak out against their experience, because it's okay to leave. You do not have to stay in an unhealthy relationship or even home life. So if there are children or young people who are even experiencing this or having to witness any form of unhealthy behaviors, please speak up. Please reach out for support. You have individuals like Dr. Pickens and Minister Tia who are here to support and advocate with and for you to assist with your safety process. I appreciate also the idea of having money set aside for individuals who need help, because that is also a resource that we're able to provide at our agency for financial abuse. And so we would strongly encourage individuals to identify what a safety plan would look like for you. Reach out to us if you need assistance with what that could look like. A counselor or advocate will always answer, if not myself. We are always able to listen and then respond. And so I think that's a big piece too, that we really want to get the voice out there to say that if you are experiencing any unhealthy relationships, you have individuals that you can go to for counsel, for support, and for safety. We are a safe place. And what we are learning and what we have learned through our time with faith communities is that a lot of people will go to their faith leaders first. And we want to equip our leadership to be able to respond. And so that is, again, the purpose of this conversation. And we also want them to know what they are not equipped to respond to. And if you do feel ill-equipped, again, please reach out to us. We're here to support not just leaders, but also the survivors, the family, so on and so forth, to have these tough conversations, because they are tough conversations. And so as we kind of wrap up a little bit, because again, we are a domestic violence agency located within Delaware County, and we are the only one located in Delaware County. However, there is a domestic violence agency within every county in the state of Pennsylvania. And our parent body, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, is also located in Harrisburg. And so do we know of any churches? I think, Dr. Pickens, you may probably be more well versed with this. But if there are any other churches that we may know who already have working relationships with agencies like ours?
Um, I'm not really specifically aware of any at this point, but what you've made me aware of is that this is an important role for us to play as a council of churches, and to I'm having a conversation with the judicatory leaders throughout the state to talk about issues. So now that I know you and can connect you, I'm going to engage them around this question and have you available to talk to them about domestic violence. So what that does is it puts it in the hands of bishops and conference ministers and other church executives to talk to pastors about these issues. So I think that you're playing an important role. So I would see this perhaps as the beginning of a partnership to actually move out throughout the state to open up these kinds of conversations. And so that's what I'm thinking at this point. So you've really kind of made me really excited about what the possibilities are as we address these issues of domestic violence.
Thank you for that. Minister Tia?
So I don't know of any churches that have a working relationship with a local domestic violence agency. I can say for my church home where I am now, I am actually scheduling a discussion with our Director of Development and Engagement, Christine Dancy. So to speak with her about what the church can do. My church has donated funds to a local organization in Philadelphia. And so part of that conversation will be, how can we expand that, beyond the church giving funds? Like, what relationship can we develop with this agency and move forward with that? So we are working on that, but unfortunately, I do not know of a church that has a specific working relationship with local domestic violence agencies.
So with that being said, what we would like to encourage, because even as an agency, we receive a lot of love and donations from local churches or faith-based communities. And we also like to not only receive the donations and support the survivors that we service, but we also, again, like to have those conversations with your congregations, with your leadership, because you never know who has been impacted by domestic violence, whether in their past or in their present, or unfortunately, potentially in their future. So that's why we are happy and more than enthusiastic to provide prevention education to anyone, but especially to young people. So I know you have youth ministries, so any youth ministries that would like this conversation, we promise to make it a good time. We do not make it inappropriate, but it's something to really uplift everyone in the community and service all the people that we love, and support, whether it be in our congregation or even in our agency and local communities. So again, thank you for allowing us to have this conversation with you. We encourage other faith perspectives to weigh in on this conversation and to reach out and to support the work that the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County is doing, and support individuals and survivors like Minister Tia, who has, again, written a phenomenal story, Suffering in Silence. I definitely encourage you all to reach out. And we also want to support the initiatives of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches. I'm a member of the World Council of Churches, so that's kind of cool. So we encourage you all to support that work and, again, continue to have this conversation so we can support survivors and families of domestic violence. Are there any last statements you all would like to make?
Go ahead, Tia.
Okay, I would just like to say, faith without works is dead. Don't tell me to go home and pray. Don't give me scriptures and then don't help me. We have a responsibility, okay? Faith without works is dead. So help me. And it goes beyond, financial. When I come to you and I'm having a conversation about being in a domestic violence relationship or trying to get out of it, I might not need money. Money might not be the issue. I might just need someone to sit down and listen to me. I might just need an emotional support. So do the work. That's a responsibility that we have as a church. And again, I say I'm a Christian. I love my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, but anyone in any religion does not deserve to be subjected to a life of abuse. So whatever religion it is that you are serving in, I know the God that I serve is love and would not see any of his children to be hurt and downtrodden and abused. So do what you need to care for yourself, but the church has a responsibility. We need to put works behind our words.
I think this is an important conversation, and that whenever we talk about domestic violence, it impacts both women and men and children. And I think that it's important for us to make ourselves aware of what the dynamics are for various segments of our communities. But I think one of the issues that I've oftentimes really wanted to be more cognizant of is that, grounded in a lot of our theology in the church context, is basic sexism. And with that sexism, I think there is a devaluation of women. And I think that speaks to a lot of this theology that we put forward that would put women in dangerous circumstances and have them remain in those conditions out of some sense that this is theologically appropriate. And I think that we have to dispel the church of that kind of thinking. And that kind of sexism, so that we can really begin giving women a sense that this is a safe space. And I'm not sure the church is always a safe space for women because of that theology. And so I think that's one element that we really need to begin looking at and addressing in order to make the church experience one in which all people are affirmed and find a sense of their wholeness.
Well said. In fact, I know Tia mentioned this in her book, and it is an ongoing conversation I know in circles I am also affiliated with, of the role of the woman, or lack thereof, in churches sometimes. So we have a long ways to go. We have come a long ways, and we still have some more to go. So our behavior definitely has to match our conversations. And so I will also share one more resource. There is a faith community leaders or community faith leaders power and control wheel to, again, advocate or how to outlining how to support survivors and victims of domestic violence. So I encourage you all to Google community faith leaders power and control wheel. It is extremely helpful on how to support domestic violence survivors moving forward. So without further ado, again, thank you all so much for your time. It is much appreciated, and we definitely look forward to continuing to work with you all to support the work of supporting survivors of domestic violence.
Thank you. Tell your father to call me.
Yes, sir.